Welcome to Ernic Live. I am your host, Shelley Tingle with the U.S. Army Engineer Research and Development Center. Today we are joined by Dr. Mihan McKenna Taylor, Senior Research Scientist and champion of basic research. Basic research seeks to answer fundamental questions and provides broad insights into many different scientific fields. For Ernic, basic research is more than just a category of research because it lays the groundwork for discovery and innovation at its core. Basic research anticipates tomorrow's problems. As we begin today's discussion with Mayan, we invite you to participate by submitting questions in the LinkedIn chat area. We will read those questions at the end of our broadcast. So let's get started. Mayan, welcome, and thank you for being with us today.
I'm delighted as always, Shelley.
To begin, can you explain what basic research is for our audience and why it is so important?
I'm going to start with a metaphor I hope translates across all disciplines, the universal Lego. Okay, so when you mentioned that we do a lot of different things at Erdog, and it's binned into different kinds of what we generally consider colors of money, right?
Right.
So we term things like 6-1, 6-2, 6-3, 6-4, and if you speak military R&D dollars, those mean certain things. But for those of you who don't, I'm going to give you an idea of how we actually think about that. 6-1 is our basic research. That's like somebody handed you a giant bin of Legos and said, "Have a date. What do you want to do with it? Good luck." All right, so then 6-2 is you're given a giant bucket of Legos and an instruction sheet that just has inspirational pictures. Like a little dragon, or you want to make a castle, or here's some things you could do with your bucket of Legos. We think it would fit. Now 6-3 is here is your set of Legos that are binned into their own little packages that you open up and you follow this template and you get the design at the end that you anticipated. And then 6-4 is, would you like a pre-built Lego? We can make one in any color. Would you like to get into Lego manufacturing? That's 6-5 and above. And so we have these different colors of money that allow us to do different things. So if we're going back to this big box of Legos, what that is potential. So basic research is potential. And another way to think about it is basic research allows us to grow the future that we need. I grew up in a farming family, so for me, I think quite a lot about wine. Not recreationally, but professionally, right? So we have a vineyard in North Carolina, and we started the vineyard when I was a child, and so I watched the whole process of how you select the land that you would want to plant your grapes in, and then you select which varietals you think are going to work in your terroir, and then you grow them. And that process of growing them can have lots of implications for what you get at the end of the day. So let's say you really want a bottle of wine. That is not something that just shows up, and it takes time to do the prep work, the site selection, and the growth of the vines, and how you prune them determines at what yield you're going to get over which time period. You can prune them short, so you get yields faster. Right? So you start growing your vines and you go year 3, great, out we go. And you don't let them get any higher. You run them out on runners. It'll be picking grapes at like knee height. And you get grapes faster, but they may not be as large a cluster and it may not be quite as rich a flavor of your grape. But if you let it grow a little longer and you work with your, the vines themselves and you prune them certain ways and you run them out on stringers at different heights over certain times, you may end up with different anticipated yields with different sugar content, which changes the way that your wine is flavored. And that is kind of the basic research perspective, because at the end of the day, you want a bottle of wine. But what you have to do is make sure that you have planted the seeds and vines and grafted creatures, as maybe in our case, correctly, such that you can actually take the fruits of the vines and turn them into a product. So with basic research, we're producing fruit, and not every vine produces fruit. Sometimes you got to prune them back and cut your losses. But what we want to do in basic research is anticipate that we're going to have a lovely bottle of wine in about 15 to 20 years by the time everything matures and you figured out your actual process for production, rather than saying, I want wine. I'm going to go to the store and buy it. Like, that's not research. You're solving a problem. You have no wine. Okay, and since we can't turn water into wine, we have to buy it. But if we want to say we want to make sure that the wine that we get is exactly what we need, it's not an instantaneous manifestation of delicious wine. You must take the steps to learn how to grow for your area, with the idea of each area produces a different kind of grape. Even the same varietal wine grown on different soil will produce a different kind of grape. And so we look at these scientific disciplines that we research at Erdic in our basic research line, which is foundational sciences and maneuver, projection, protection, biology, chemistry, physics, and geospatial, currently as we stand right now, and infrastructure sciences. These are foundational scientific concepts, but they're planted in the terroir of Erdic. So they become different fruits than we would have investigations other places, just by the nature of our wonderful research cadre that we have here and the external pressures, the weather that our grapes go through. Because the weather is the world geopolitical scene that we operate under. It is the strictures that Army research at the Pentagon level, the DoD research puts on our funding requirements and the operational needs that we're meeting. Is the weather, is the climate that we grow our grapes under and we produce our research into. And each of those will create a different kind of wine at the end of the day, or a lovely research product that can be consumed by an end user, in our case, the warfighter. And this is a metaphor that you can take across any discipline that does foundational research. It takes time, it takes care, and it takes an acceptance of risk. Because if anybody else out there has been a farmer, there is always risk.
Always risk. So when you talk about basic research, and you just described some of the areas that we have basic research in, can you tell us a few of the examples of some of Erdic's current research, or some of our vineyards that we have growing here at Erdic?
We have quite a lot of really fabulous research that is somewhat, things that you would expect, and some things that you would be like, no, why is this here? We have some great research in materials. So we're known for material properties, and Erdic represents the engineers, and the engineers are often charged with protecting the things that you can't take with you, right? You can think about body armor or tank armor, and you're like, one of the first things you do is leave, right? You wish to avoid. So what we specialize in is protecting the things that you cannot take with you. Right? That's the hard part. If you can't move it, how do you protect it? And so a lot of our materials research is focused in things like, believe it or not, geomaterials, you might know it as concrete. Just because Romans have been using concrete for millennia doesn't mean that there isn't new innovations that can come from that. And the material properties that we investigate allow us to do things to support like fixed infrastructure with materials that are lighter or faster to in place or directionally grown. We have one research project in concrete that is allowing for directional fracturing. And so it's, can you grow concrete under a gradient such that, not grow, but cure it, but the crystals grow and align in a way that you can force crystalline fracturing to either protect or mitigate damage to a structure. And that's done by Chuck Weiss and his team. And it's, how do you re-envision the way that you do building materials? Just because it's been around for a while doesn't mean that there isn't an opportunity for innovation.
Right.
If you look at in our geospatial world where we've got sensing technologies and everyone goes, yes, but LiDAR was developed a while ago. Why do you need to research anything in that? We don't research LiDAR. We research why errors in LiDAR measurements get into our processing codes and get populated down into a mission command that says, I'm looking at this thing through this box and it says, this is what this looks like. What if it isn't? And so understanding the physics and the optics of why these errors propagate through measurement systems in a geospatially referenced domain is one of the critical aspects. Or digitizing a surfer's brain. This was one of the basic research projects we had for a number of years. It's now actually transitioned. So everybody who goes to the beach understands the principles of body surfing so you don't get your face smashed in the ground. Right?
Absolutely.
But first you got to smash your face a whole bunch.
A whole bunch. Or crack your ribs, yes.
Yeah, it's good times. But the principle is that people who are really good at surfing intuitively know how to manipulate their body and their boards through a wave. Right. You try telling a computer to do that. How many times that digital surfer get their face smashed? And it turns out that isn't a problem of computation necessarily, but of understanding the physical processes of a near-shore terrain. Right. So if you did not know, the Army has more small watercraft than all of the other services combined, which I did not know before I started working here, but I definitely know now. And we're great partners with the Marines on doing research in littoral zones because we're the ones with the itty-bitty boats that are like the surfers that have to land and super don't want to go ka-thump.
Right.
if you have had other broadcasts on the support we did to World War II and beach landings,
Right.
we are still the people who have to research in those domains. And the more foundational understanding we can have about those processes and physical phenomena, the safer and better off our warfighters will be.
So you said before that research is not development and science is not technology. Can you explain what you meant by that?
Well, it's, it may sound a little word salady, but they actually have different meaning. And when we conflate them, we're asking for solutions for things that are mismatched, right? Science is the process of discovery. That is looking at the world and finding out what's there, all right? So if we think about technology, that is implementation of those discoveries, okay? So you have the discovery process and then you have the implementation process. But if you're looking at research and development, it's slightly different. So research is our ability to investigate the world around us. We investigate through research. And then development is how we then operationalize that successful investigation. And so it takes this, you can have research as either science or technology.
Right.
And then you've got development is how we pass things off in those prepackaged Lego kits into somebody else's hands. And so those four categories roughly correlate to the types of Legos, sort of. You've got your discover, develop, deliver, which is Erdog's motto. Your discovery is the science portion. And then you've got your development, which is your technology and your research. And then you've got delivery. And delivery is this implementation of development that goes out the door. And we're unique in that we actually have all of those colors of money under the same house because we support the engineer. We support the USACE, but we also support the Office of the Corps of Engineers. We support the military engineer. And sometimes the American populace forgets that USACE has a civil hat, but it is also a military organization. And our chain of command up through General Spellman values the contributions research does not just to the civil realm, but also to the military realm, because the military engineer is critically important. You can't get there and back again, to use a Hobbit reference, without the engineer. And that's why we focus what we do for all four of those: science, technology, research, and development, to benefiting the engineer at the end of the day.
And that's part of the unique power of Ernic, of the research and development, of the power of the of having all of that under one roof, of all these cross-discipline teams, and bringing that all together with basic research being our foundation. So because basic research focuses on discovery, like you said, instead of implementation, how important is creativity or the concept of play in the discovery process? What does that concept of play look like in your day-to-day world of basic research?
Well, let me start off. I love my job. There's much joy to be had in basic research. So animals learn through play. If you bring home a new puppy and they want to play with you, they're learning how to be a good dog. One hopes. I have lots of good dogs and they played a lot. But all of us learn through play. When we are children, we are not sent to just do, I will not talk when the teacher's talking on the board anymore. We emphasize with children the ability to learn new things about the world through play. And in that gameplay, we can investigate our world around us. Inherent in gameplay is risk. You and I aren't going to play a poker game where everybody wins.
That's right.
We even have board games called Risk. Part of the fun of play is you may not win every time. Winning all the time is boring, I think. There's no game to it. And so with basic research, there is a huge appetite for risk. If you already know the answer, you're doing a homework problem.
That's right.
And you don't belong in that portfolio. Okay. Basic research is a way for us to play with the principles that the universe operates under and see what we could do to discover something new or push a boundary. There was a wonderful podcast, because if you're going to listen to a podcast that is not just our podcast, because
Right.
we do in fact have a great one, I recommend one by Tim Harford. It's let's see, Cautionary Tales. I think it's a Pushkin Industries production. If you haven't listened to Cautionary Tales, there's one called Frittering Away Genius, where Tim Harford talks about Claude Shannon, the father of basically digital principles in computing. And they had a lot of side projects, and he also focused pretty hard on the concept of play and gaming the gambling engine. And I think in that particular podcast, he had set out to say that you shouldn't fritter away your genius. Imagine what you could have done if you paid attention. And at the end, he came to the conclusion, no, actually, the frittering away of genius is what allowed him to make two profound fundamental discoveries, because he was always playing at something. And that's what we encourage in our basic researchers, is to play at something. If you already know the answer, this is not the place for you. But it's also not the place for you if you do not have an appetite for failure. Some people don't like to play a game where they can't win. That's not fun for some people. And so not everybody is well suited emotionally to be a basic researcher. There are some that thrive under the challenge of what if.
That's right.
Ask yourself, what if you could build a better future? What if you could actually manifest the things we saw in Star Trek as a kid? The tricorder is the iPhone. It's not that somebody just went, I'd like to make an iPhone. They went, ooh, wow, that was vision. I want that vision. How do I make it happen? And oftentimes people go, well, you can't do basic research in engineering. That actually is not the case. All engineering is implementation of basic research from prior years that's been proven and then gone through this R&D process into something that's fieldable. Absolutely everything that we do in our portfolio is basic research for an engineering purpose at the end of the day. Now, when you define basic research, it says with no practical application in mind.
Right.
But we don't do basic research in a vacuum.
Right. There's a purpose.
There's a purpose,
the end
right? So it's more like use-inspired or case-inspired basic research. We work for the Army, which means that we have to take into consideration the problems that the future Army engineer will face. You ask somebody to give you the next landmine, they're going to give you the last landmine.
That's right.
We're not asking for people to go into basic research and fix the problems we have now. We're asking them to say, all right, put on your sci-fi writer hat. Think way out in the distance and play a game with yourself about what will it be. And if you can anticipate those problems, how would you fix them? What do we not understand in the world now that if we just looked at it now, 15 to 17 years from now, which by the way is what it takes to actually field a basic research advancement, what would we investigate now to fix the problems that we could possibly see coming?
So a few minutes ago, you were talking about how you have to have the appetite for failure or risk. You have to have this risk thing in you of it's okay to fail. So could you give us an example of some of your research to where there was a failure and it was okay, and how that failure led to a success?
I have a couple of examples in mind. I'm going to call out Jim Lever, who was one of our researchers at our Cold Regions Laboratory a number of years ago in basic research. He set out to prove the hypothesis that you can glide across a field of snow because the ice melts at the interfacial layer. Right? That sounds like it would make sense. You're smishing it and it would be slippery, and then you would have ice melt, and that's what the frictionless property of sliding over ice was, because we do ice here, quite a lot of it, really well, actually. We have ice that sticks to planes, or ice that we can drive over, and ice you can build with. We're ice people. Whoops. His whole premise was I can put together a mathematical representation of this melt layer, except that he found out it wasn't melting.
Oh, no.
It was polishing. It was much closer to how you polish a blade. And so in the process of proving his hypothesis wrong, he developed new instrumentation that allows us to study this polishing frictionless effect with different types of frozen media, which has then moved off down into the research world of, okay, so now there's this whole new physics that we had assumed was correct.
But it wasn't.
It was super not. It was not correct. And another example on the dirt side of the house was research done by Oliver Taylor, who is at the Geotechnical and Structures Laboratory, into dirt. Okay, so everybody assumed that the top meter of the soil is obeying more Coulomb's laws of mechanics. In other words, constitutive mechanics. It acts like a block or whatever, and it is fine. Besides, engineers just scrape that top layer off to build something anyway. It's not a problem. Well, unfortunately, military expeditionary engineers cannot scrape the top meter off of anything, and if you want to install, say, instrumentation in the near surface or build without improvement, you actually kind of need to know what that stuff does. And so his basic research project was, all right, we're going to find a way to mathematically represent these more Coulomb laws of mechanics in the top meter of the soil to be able to predict behavior, and we can't. It doesn't work at all. In fact, that it does not do any of the things that they thought that they did under this lack of confinement, which basically means dirt in the ground has other dirt on top, and it acts like it's confined, by definition. But stuff at the interface, interface boundary is a bunch of knot and a bunch of oops. And so this whole section in between didn't do what it was supposed to physically. And so he and his research team have gone back and looked at what actually governs the mechanical behavior of grains at a free surface boundary under different moisture conditions. And in both of those cases, they upset a lot of people. Because if you say 70 years of prevailing theory is wrong, do you think people are happy? They're not happy. They're not happy at all. Where people's entire careers have been under the assumption that that is correct. And that's when they proposed their research. They also both of them went with their prevailing theory. It happened about the same point in time in time, and they both went, well, nope. So one of the things that we ask our basic research aspirational PIs is, who will be upset if you were right? Who will be upset if you were wrong? And if you can't answer anyone to either of those categories, does your research actually have impact? That's right. Right? We want impactful research. It may not be impact that we can envision when we start a project, right? Because we don't really know where we're going. We can aim for over there.
Right.
And both of them were aiming for over there and ended up way over there. But it turns out what they found when they got there has dramatic implications for a variety of potential engineering options down the road. And if we hadn't looked at it with the presumption that it was correct and be willing to have them go, nope, it's not, this proved out to be a failure, we wouldn't have known that.
And all the new knowledge would not be gained to solve the problems. So I want to take this time to remind viewers that you are part of our conversation, and to be sure to ask questions in the chat. We're going to ask Mayan those questions just in a few minutes. And so if you just tuned in, I am here with Dr. Mihan McKenna Taylor, and she is talking about basic research. And so recently, USACE released its R&D strategy, which included their top 10 R&D priorities. How does basic research align with this new strategy?
So here's a nuanced answer to this one. Explicitly, our basic research portfolio, as executed by the Erdic, supports the Army engineer as in military engineer, field of engineer, warfighter engineer. There's no basic research aligned with any of the R&D strategy. Okay, and as we went through the S&T R&D discussion earlier, right, not all research is science. Some of it is in technology. But that doesn't mean that we aren't benefiting things beyond support for win future wars in the R&D strategies, because these foundational research efforts have infinite possible outcomes. To give an example of basic research that was funded on the military side, which is again what we have our funding dollars in, that has benefit to the USACE civil mission. A number of years ago, I came up with a crazy idea back in 2006 that was colloquially known as Mayan singing bridges, that you could use the structural emanations from large infrastructure to determine condition and capacity from non-line of sight distances, tens to hundreds of kilometers away, depending on your critical infrastructure. You can see where this would be really important for maneuver, right? Mm-hmm. Like if you're actually going to be going places where you don't have the option of touching bridges first, you kind of might want to know what they're capable of holding, right before you get there and it falls down.
Right.
All right. So from a civil engineering perspective, they go, why can't you just go touch it? Sorry, my friend, I don't feel like getting shot today. I will not be doing that. What if I can do it from 15 kilometers over here? Let's see what we can get. And so that was a crazy idea in, mid 2005, 2006, but I was also right. However, I didn't know I was right. I had a what if, having done a couple of bridge inspections and went, this is like golf with a clipboard. Cool, I like it. it's not terribly efficient. What if you had to do 500 bridges in a week? What is the manpower cost of that? Much less this one critical bridge you could never touch. What about all of the infrastructure in the United States that's falling apart?
That's right.
So the foundational research was prompted by the use case of a military engineer that had to do route security. But it has the ability to transition across the civil mission set that USACE has. And so in this year, in 2021, we've released the publicly facing research from that project. It took that long to mature the technologies to something that's implementable by departments of transportation or the USACE side of the house for securing infrastructure. If you've got a wide area surveillance where you have these 500 bridges that are of interest, what happens when Hurricane Katrina hits them?
That's right.
And here at the Katrina hit Mississippi about the same point in time I did. Katrina. So
not a coincidence.
but all of the I-10 bridges off the Gulf
Right.
Coast that kind of fell down. It would have been nice to know that was happening as it was happening.
Right.
And then what do we do about prioritizing resources? And it's not so much figuring out which ones fell down. Yes, you can see that from an overhead image. They're just not there anymore. How do you know which ones are safe to use?
That's right.
And so prioritizing which ones should have an in-person in-depth inspection, as these are the most likely candidates for success. That allows us to streamline what we do on an emergency response perspective. USACE responds to emergencies because we're big on the savings of people, all right? But how do we use those resources? Because we don't have enough.
Right.
If there, as much as we have infrastructure bills that will help, there's a lot of infrastructure out there that needs attention. And we do not have the capacity to instantaneously inspect to the level of detail required everything out there. So these kinds of technologies of the Mayan singing bridges actually can transition then into, all right, what do you do in a urban area? We have two researchers that have gotten their PhDs in exactly this problem. Sarah McComas is in GSL, looked at the urban problem. And how do you deal with lots of infrastructure all piled up on each other? How do you assess all of that all at once? And, Dr. Danielle Whitlow went to wine country out
That's
there
right.
and looked at the Feather River Bridge series downstream from the Oroville Dam, which, as we may have remembered from news, we were worried that it would fall down. How do you assess an entire river system as it is potentially failing? How do we put this in place to have this extra layer of awareness? We have seismic networks for earthquakes, but that's telling us what the ground is doing. What are the bridges doing? Some of them have seismometers on them, not all of them. Like, what do we do for all of it? And so that was one of the reasons that we invested on the military side can transition through. And so our foundational research is critically important for the success of the R&D priorities, whichever one that you choose. That doesn't mean there shouldn't be more.
Right. There's always a need for new knowledge, and the priorities we have now reflect, knowledge that we don't have. I mean,
that should have had basic research in it 15 years ago problems, right?
Right.
And if there were investments with that as the inspirational use category, and you'd move that funding, the research and development priorities, that research also needs to include science.
Right.
And it needs to remind the people who hold purse strings that risk is okay in science, because otherwise we will never learn something new. We must learn something new. And you must accept that fate of the universe out there with the money that doesn't want risk. You cannot evolve if you do not risk.
That's right. You can't find new knowledge, that's for sure. It has been said, a nation which depends upon others for its new basic scientific knowledge will be slow in its industrial progress and weak in its competitive position in world trade, regardless of its mechanical skill. What are your thoughts on that statement?
Oh, I do love that one.
I do too.
Dr. Bush was right. We can't outsource our future to somebody else's whims.
Right.
That is short-term gain, long-term pain, which is not normally how we think of that. But if we are relying on other people to solve problems that are not in their best interest, we will never, ever get there. There's a inspiration that I like to give basic researchers when they want to come into working in this portfolio. And I slap up there a picture of Dante's Gates to Hell from the classic Italian literature, because everybody loves themselves some medieval Italian poetry, which I do very much. And the words inscribed on top are, "Abandon all hope ye who enter here." that is how you should approach basic research, because using hope in terms of progress outsources the work to someone else, and there's no guarantee that you will get there. So when I use this as an inspirational example, people are like, "Whoa, seems kind of bleak." I'm like, "No, that's because you've only read Inferno. You have to read all three, because the Inferno is the first step. There's also purgatory and heaven. You know, the whole point of this was not to like roast popes for all eternity in flaming coffins, though, you know, he did a great job describing that. It was actually so that Dante could achieve his love, which is Beatrice, at the end of heaven. And he has to go through all these trials in order to get there. But if he had hope, he would never have taken that first step. Hope outsources the hard work to someone else. The quote that you read is a reflection of that. It uses different language, right? What it says is, if you hope somebody else is going to solve your problem, man, you are hosed.
That's right.
And like
You're at their mercy.
You're at their mercy. And like Dante, he had to abandon hope that someday he'd be reunited with Beatrice. He had to do it. Right? You must now go through these trials and figure out what does and doesn't work. And the possibility that you might not get out, it's there. But if you are not doing the work, you will not get there. I mean, there is time for hope. But hope is what you aim at someone else. Discovery is what you're aiming at yourself. And you must invest in your ability to discover. When I say your, I could mean an organization. I could mean a nation. I could mean a planet. I mean, I'm pretty sure that I could hope aliens are going to come save us from climate change or whatever, but it's not going to happen. Not unless we do something. And so that abandon all hope is a call to action, not despair. It is time to ask you to think about what you want out of your future.
And what a great time to be in R&D basic research than right now, when it's a topic of conversation. I mean, of what are we going to do with our infrastructure? And then we have other issues such as climate change and you know, protecting our military. And so all of that goes back to fundamental knowledge that is discovered through basic research. So that is just fascinating. All right, we're going to take questions from our audience. And so let's see here. If basic research is looking ahead 15 to 20 years, attention on infrastructure, how do you sense an increased appetite in basic research on the civil works side?
How do I sense it? As in, like, how do I feel if there is some?
I think, let me reread that. How do you, so how do you increase the appetite in basic research on the civil works side? How do you transfer that knowledge from military, where you're being funded, into the civil works side?
So some of that is communication. The language used in general civil world does not have happy feelings associated with risk or discovery. You want a certainty, right? And the military side of things is doing a lot of the hard work on the risk portion. It's having a national discussion that we must do things differently. Honestly, if we had this discussion a number of years ago, we wouldn't be in this situation. The everything is fine, right? We've had an everything is fine about the
kick the can.
Kick the can on the infrastructure, because not knowing the answer is scary. People will avoid things. Most people will avoid things that they do not know the outcome to, because it might be risky. There might be a problem. You know, we have politics that governs our spending, and those are the most risk-averse collection of people, because they're operating under the whims of society.
That's right.
But for adoption of these new and novel things that we develop on the military side into civil world, we're offering them a view of what could be with less risk, right? So the difference between military and civil is actually whose backyard it's in. And if it's in someone else's backyard, that's a military problem. And if it's in your backyard, that's a civil problem. You actually have the same problem. You just have different people to answer to when you solve it.
That's right.
Right? So reminding people that we can take these military solutions of 51% is definitely better than 49% surety. In the civil world, people are like, I need 110%. Give me your oh, hi, like that's how we got where everything's falling down. We don't want
That's right.
that as the answer. Please look to the risk that we have subsumed on the military side and say, all right, I understand that we have to evolve. We must take new into account, new materials, new design processes, new implementation techniques, new modes of transportation. Like, how are we going to meet together in the future where we say, all right, we've invented, let's say we're going to go do like light sails, I don't know, electric cars. And electric car infrastructure is different than what's required for traditional automobiles. If you're going to go the ultimate, how do I get to work in the morning problem?
Right.
But we're not doing this at the same time. We're not improving the civilian infrastructure along with the revolutions in, say, transportation methods that we have to do, and it must be people at the top acknowledge that this is happening, and it is happening whether you wish it to or not. Right. Your discomfort is irrelevant to the change.
Right. That's exactly right. So how smoothly does basic research taking place at Erdic get transferred into this applied research? Is that a smooth process?
No, my friends, it is not.
Like, how does that happen?
It's, magic. Woo.
It's magic.
No, actually, when we propose basic research projects, we ask people to think about where it would go if they were successful. And if they say, I have absolutely no idea, but it's in our core competencies, we're like, that's good enough. Or we can say, yes, this is actually designed to provide a solution that we found in our applied program to a problem. Right, like we are working on a 6.3 applied project over here. We discovered we can't do this thing that we wanted because we don't understand why insert object doesn't do what I need it to do. Basic research is initiated, and that swims relatively seamlessly, provided its hypothesis was correct, not the times like I talked about earlier where it was like, oops, our bad, it's not, we can't have this thing over here. In those cases, there's a lot smoother transition. The cases where we are discovering things we didn't expect can take a little while to find a home. Even ones where we had a planned transition into something in a few years, we can still find something we did not expect. And in that, it's not a seamless process, and it requires an organization to acknowledge that. Sometimes you hear this referred to as the Valley of Death. I think it's actually the abyss of the ego. And it is a catching and a throwing problem. And everybody has to be playing the same kind of ball game. And if they're not, it doesn't matter how many things are being thrown over this abyss. If somebody is too busy watching the stands and not the ball, they're never going to catch it.
Right.
For example, you could have somebody being like, throw me the ball. And you've got your 5-year-old out on the baseball field being like, I'd like to throw it at that flower. That seems better. And you're like, no, over here. And they're like, I like that one. That should be where I go. And so you actually have to be playing the same ball game, and it requires both sides to be paying attention. That's one of the reasons Erdog is different. We actually have everybody up and down this research chain engaged in what's needed and what's coming. So we have a little less of that abyss of the ego, because sometimes we're the same team. Right. It's the same people that could be talking every day about what's needed and what they're doing. In other cases, it requires organizational senior support to figure it out. Not everyone is capable of doing everything all the time. That is an absurd situation to put researchers in. Some people are very, very good at the discovery process. Some people are very, very good at the engineering process. And facilitating that communication, we have something called research and development areas. That's what their primary function is, I think. Whether they think that or not, I don't know. I'm not everyone. But that's what I think. And so we have to make sure that conversation happens. A lot of the abyss of the ego is lack of communication. People aren't hearing things that they expect, so they don't hear anything at all.
Right. So is there, here at Ernic, do we have researchers that do both applied and basic?
Well, I was.
But I mean, is that
it's not common.
It's not common.
So we do have some, particularly those who were doing an applied problem that found something they couldn't do.
Right.
And in those cases, we often get PhDs out of it, because they're like, I have got to figure this out. This is not, why is this not? And so they'll go and pursue long-term training to study that problem. And our basic research program funds quite a lot of PhDs that are those kinds of situations where it's that person is like, I will become the world's leading expert in this one thing that will not let me sleep at night for all that's holy.
Right.
Jerry Ballard did his PhD on transpiration of water vapor through roots into plants. Yeah, he likes his lawn, but there was an actual military problem that was associated with, and it kept him up at night, so he went and got a PhD in it.
And figured it out.
And figured it out.
And so
right?
used the basic research because he had an applied problem.
Problem, man. It was a problem.
And there was a gap in knowledge.
Yes. So
and
he
goes back and fills that gap.
Yes.
And so that and of course that ties right into our long-term training program and solving those problems. That makes very good sense. All right, so we have one of our viewers, Mish, asked, how can Erdic's climate change research inform policymakers? And so, computing can reveal issues, insights of lots of areas in regard to geospatial research or physical science. But what about the discovery phenomena inherent within edge computing and analysis, and to themselves separate in the fields that they help? Is Ernic able to carve out niches for itself in these areas?
There was a lot of questions.
There was a lot of questions.
It was an impressive
So
list.
let's start with the first one. How do we, when we do these basic research or even applied research, does it influence policy or is that part of it?
So I think it is more organizational. Our influence on policy is at an organizational level. Like the Erdic participates in the broader discussions about climate change across the DoD. Not just in the Army, across the DoD. And the people who are involved in that policy discussion are probably not necessarily the people who are at their benches doing research. But there is quite a lot of what we research on our basic to applied side that would have a role in a climate change response. Elizabeth Ferguson is the lead technical director for our installations in the operational environment research and development area. And she has some phenomenal research projects that are looking at mitigating the effects of climate change. If you're looking at what happens with more fires, more floods, more hurricanes, more traumatic events, the engineer is the response to those events. That's who responds. And so understanding the science between what is the physical phenomenon, what was the driver, and what is our mitigation to it, that's one of the places that we have a role that really ties us to that. And so the people who have the discussions on the policy side, we aren't operating in a vacuum. Our research is, whether it is branded climate change or not, it's still foundational research in the phenomena that we observe on a daily basis and are called to respond to. But that's, for all of you Erdic researchers out there, thou shalt not free range on policy. Come see a friend.
Right.
What was the second part of that
All
question?
right, so we're going to go to the next one because we have a lot of questions. So Patrick asks, how does Erdic partner with academia, industry, and other government labs in basic research efforts?
So we are what's considered a single investigator organization. So we actually fund research to be executed at the Erdic primarily under our basic research program. It's more similar to what goes on at, say, ARO, where they're funding academics as single investigators. So we're not set up like the Army Research Lab, in which it's like a funded line to go do your research and you can send some out or keep some in. For our specific military program, we do have academic partnerships where we will bring in academic experts. So if we want to bring capability to the Erdic, we will have funding that allows us to bring that capability into our research organization through long-term training partnerships or visiting professors. We do quite a lot of visiting professors that come in, but we're primarily executing the research here. That doesn't mean we don't have partnerships on the, say, congressional partnerships with institutions in areas that are basic research affiliated with industry and academia. We make sure that any research executed inside the Erdic has demonstrated thorough knowledge of everything that's going on in industry and academia. We have a very rigorous proposal process. It takes a year to get funded, and there are all kinds of wickets. Does it matter to the Army wicket, and is it academically robust wicket, and does it fit with the overall portfolio and the purpose of the engineer wicket? And so that academic wicket, we actually have independent academic evaluations of all of our proposals to make sure that we are not duplicating efforts and that we are partnering appropriately with academia. But we're also part of a DoD basic research ecosystem. So we leverage, what we do is not the same things as that they would do at the Naval Research Lab or the Air Force Research Lab or the Army Research Lab. They have their own mission spaces. And so we make sure that we can deconflict what goes on in our basic research program with the efforts that are already funded DoD-wide. That's why we're part of this DoD basic research ecosystem, and they may be able to fund academics that we wouldn't be able to fund. So like an Army Muri, we can partner with an academic through research done through the, say Army Research Office Muri program. And so we have some leveraging opportunities where we have an internal proposal that's funded and it is paired with an Army Muri, and Garage Savant has one right now that is looking at mud, because mud is awesome, and there's some academics looking at mud, and we're looking at mud, and we're going to look at mud together. And we have separate funding streams that are moving together sort of in a parallel effort.
Right. To get those knowledge gaps. Brandon wants to know, how does Ernic collaborate with similar offices in other military services, and how do you reduce duplication research efforts?
It's the previous answer, but
yes.
One of the things that's really important to do is archive all basic research through DTIC. It's congressionally mandated, and making sure that we have an archive of the things that have already been invested in, not the successful things.
Right.
So people track number of publications or number of patents that come out of a basic research project, and they should be tracking number of things that super didn't work.
Right.
So that we do not, in fact, invest in that again. So the Defense Technical Information Center, I think DTIC, I'm sorry about that, has to archive all results of basic research, whether you were successful or not. And so it is on our various commands to make sure that they have also done the research to make sure that they are not duplicating efforts that have already been done at other organizations. We have liaison people that would look for that. Inside Erdog is Jessica Coleman, who is the programs officer for basic research. And so one of her primary functions is to make sure that we are not duplicating efforts, to coordinate with the other commands. For us, we are responsive to both the Army Futures Commands and ASAL.
Right.
And so both of those parties participate in our proposal selection process. And if they go, hey, this sounds a little bit like this thing over here, you had better deconflict, or you're not going to get funded. And so we also expect our research cadre that gets funded to be academic leaders in their field. They should be adjuncts. They usually are. Like, these are senior leaders, whether or not that's the lead PI. A lot of our proposals are structured such that we have a senior person, may not be executing, and possibly a junior person who is getting a project for the first time. Those senior people's role is to make sure that we are not duplicating efforts, current or historical, because nobody wants to waste taxpayer money, and we super don't have enough of it to waste anything. Our portfolio percentage is tiny in basic research compared to what is executed at Ernic. But as we like to say, it is the smallest dollar for the biggest impact.
That's right. Because it's all foundational.
It's all foundational.
For everything applied. So David has a very specific question. What role do emerging technologies play in Erdic's 6.1 areas? Example, data analytics and edge computing can reveal insights into a lot of areas with regard to geospatial research, physical sciences, and what about the discovery in phenomena inherent within edge computing or analytics unto themselves, separate from the field they help? Is Ernic able to carve out this niche, and are offices going to, or other organizations going to be created to address these emerging technologies, or is it something already existing to be modified to encompass these emerging technologies? That was a lot of words.
That's okay.
And it got merged with a different question earlier.
So,
but it's emerging technologies. So how does that influence basic research?
We actually every year evaluate where our program stands, and if we need to reprogram to deal with emerging technologies that are in line with our core competencies, we do that. So we call them strategic research areas. They fit under our 4 funded task lines, which is geospatial, the maneuver protection, and the infrastructure sciences, and the biological, physical, and chemical sciences. And every year we evaluate what we ask for the following year, which is a 3 to 5 year out from there. So we're forward projecting. So we are, when there are emerging technologies that come up. For example, this very specific question relates to what we have attempted to do in the fundamental infrastructure sciences. It's not about new bridges, it's also like data infrastructure. And so in the past we've investigated some of the emergent data science technologies in that line, in addition to things like materials or power and energy and that kind of thing. But what we found is we actually need some more foundational computational sciences to take advantage of the implementation of physical principles into edge computing or quantum computing or massive HPC scenarios. We actually have a future project we hope to bring online officially as a 5th, number 5. My little medallion here only has 4 gears for our 4 tasks, but it will have a 5th if this is approved. We hope it will. because we have found things that we do not understand in the implementation of the numerical simulations with the advance of these emerging computational options. And it's, as Rob Wallace, director of the Engineering Resilient Systems, likes to say, it's I want to do it faster and I want to do it more efficiently, but you can only do that if you do it right.
That's right.
And so we have figured out that some of the physical implementations into traditional modeling, when you do it at scale, fall apart. And models are nothing more than collective delusions that we all decide are fine at the same time. And they are only fine until your computational resources prove that you have a problem. And so wound into the edge computing or the quantum computing is, what is that new computational science going to reveal about our assumptions of the world that we live in, particularly for engineering problems, which is our niche. You know, we have all of these codes that we run on the applied side, the development side, and sometimes they produce results that don't match the real world. You can't just say the real world is wrong.
Right.
What you can say is there's something in our computational formulation that is incorrect, and it may be within a tolerance that's okay for some things, but what it's telling us is there's something wrong. And the implementation on, 10,000 cores is different.
Right.
Why? What are we getting here? And so there is some real research that needs to be done in the foundational computational sciences, edge quantum or HPC, that is uniquely suited to Erdic's full spectrum R&D portfolio.
Right. So, and based on that, do you feel like the basic research is agile? Because there's so many wickets and different processes of going through all the abstracts or proposals. Are you able to be agile with emergent technologies or just new problems that all of a sudden pop up?
Within our lines as programmed, yes, to a certain degree. We, in the middle of a year, we're not going to stop or start a project unless they don't meet their milestones and are like, yeah, I can't do this thing. That was my no-go point. And we're like, no go. Okay, mini release. Because we reevaluate every year we reevaluate where we're going. And it is reevaluated down from the scientist level all the way up to our board of directors level in concurrence with our ASALT and AFC partners, that this is the thing that we're doing, and because we must be responsive to emergent. It takes a while for technology to become out of the scientific discovery, but the discovery process is considerably more responsive to emergent technologies because we can go, oh, this is a new thing. I hadn't considered that new thing. Oh, new opportunity. We shall do this thing now. And it takes a little while to get like budgets in line, but research takes time.
Right.
You don't, as I said, you don't produce a bottle of wine after you stick a grape seed in the ground.
That's right.
But we can say, I'm going to need wine. I should plant some seeds, and ooh, look, we discovered a new varietal that might grow best in this quartz-heavy soil. We should do that. You know what I mean? Like that, we are much more adaptive in our basic research portfolio than any of the rest of them.
Right. So you have the ability to be agile and solve these future problems as they come up. So you mentioned the unique personality traits that, this is one of our questions from the audience. You mentioned unique personality traits that make someone successful at basic research. How does Ernic nurture these traits and encourage researchers to undertake basic research?
Well, for one, we now do roadshows, so it used to not be that way. But there's been a recognition at senior leadership levels that we have to help researchers find the joy in that, if that is what provides them joy. So we call them roadshows. We go, before the world fell apart, we couldn't go anywhere and have 6 feet apart on couches. We would go in person and have workshops that were sort of inspirational workshops for people who wish to find out what basic research is and then find out how they could fit into it. Hopefully we'll go back to doing that as soon as they let us wander about and breathe at each other.
Right.
You can stay over there.
Yeah. I'm staying here.
Just go over there. I think it is a 2-part problem. Erdic has to encourage it, but the researchers have to ask. And there's a lot of self-ownership to basic research. People get into and flourish there because they have a restless mind. I think you've said on previous ones that Erdic allows you to be whatever you want to be if you can find somebody to pay you to do it.
That's right.
Because you really can. You never do the same thing twice.
That's right.
Not ever. And so the people who say, I really want to go do this fun thing, I would like to have the joy at work, help me with this proposal process, there's an infrastructure that helps that. but it also requires that person who wants that to understand that it isn't just given to you just because you have a cool idea. Just because that idea is new to you doesn't mean it's new to the world.
Right. That makes sense. Well, I'm going to wrap it up for today, and I'm going to tell our audience, if you have any questions that you would like to ask Mayan that we didn't have a chance to get to, and there were several, you can also leave it in the chat and we'll try to get the answers to you, or you can always contact us at urticinfo@usace.army.mil. You can shoot us that email. That email address again is urticinfo@usace.army.mil, and we'll ask those questions to Mayan, and we'll be sure to get you those answers. Mayan, is there anything else you would like to address before we end today's conversation?
I would like to invite anyone who wants to change the world to look at basic research, to find the joy in something new, because it's going to take all of us embracing that part of our personality to reinvent the future that we really need. So get at it, everybody.
Let's
go do some crazy science.
That's right. Well, thank you so much. And audience, we'll be back next month at the next Erdog Live. And as Mayan says, find your joy. Thank you so much.